Almost any company in the UAE can now be fully foreign-owned after landmark changes to the Commercial Companies Law. It's expected to spur foreign direct investment and business activity in the UAE. But what does it mean for you? You're listening to the Business Extra podcast coming from the National in Abu Dhabi. I'm Mustafa Alrawi, Assistant Editor-in-Chief. So let me set the scene here. This week, the President Sheikh Khalifa issued changes to the Commercial Companies Law in the UAE. The big top-line news of that is that all companies that's onshore can be fully foreign-owned. Also, the aspect where an Emirati or UAE national or UAE company was needed to be an agent, that is scrapped. There's various other aspects to the changes that will impact companies across the country. But it was taken as something that we've been waiting for a long time as we've evolved towards this point at the federal level for the United Arab Emirates. And really the idea of opening up the economy to more nationalities, to all nationalities, should spur foreign direct investment as well as business activity. And in terms of ease of doing business and competitiveness for the UAE staying ahead of the rest of the region and perhaps other similar jurisdictions that foreign investors might be looking at, it's definitely a big step forward. So to discuss this, we've been able to get some legal experts in from the firm Baker McKenzie Habib Mulla. We have Omar Momany, the partner of Head of Corporate and Commercial Practice Group, and Hani Naja, the partner of Corporate and Commercial. Omar and Hani, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you, Mustafa. It's a pleasure.
So as I'm setting the scene, bear with me. So these changes that were announced have been welcomed. There's obvious potential benefits that I've just run through. But I just want to pick up on this point that it has been an evolutionary curve of steps over the last sort of 17 years or so, getting to this point where we've had a number of measures to make doing business here for anyone in the world that much smoother. And that includes, for example, the setting up of free zones or other legislation like an FDI law a couple of years ago that designated certain sectors. And of course, the law itself has a number of interesting points, one of which being that there are still strategic sectors such as oil and gas exploration that will not be affected by these changes, other sectors in there as well. That at the federal level, this sets clear there's no minimum threshold for Emirati involvement in terms of a company being set up. But the local authorities will each have their own opportunity to set that level of participation. And also a committee is going to be formed that will look at strategic sectors and level of Emirati participation. And the cabinet will also continue to be involved. So the evolution continues, Omar. But I mean, if you can talk a little bit about, where we were and how we got here from your point of view, your expertise, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mustafa. Absolutely. It's been a journey, and it's interesting you mentioned the 17 or 18 years number that corresponds to my years of practice in the United Arab Emirates, and I've seen many of those evolution milestones. I guess it all started, I guess, back in the days when trade free zones were established, likes of Jebel Ali free zone and Dubai Airport free zone and other airport and ports relevant, free trade zones. And then the idea was to enhance the position of the United Arab Emirates and Dubai in specific as a trading hub for the region. Then the model was successful. Then it moved into creating specialized free zones that looks after different industries or different businesses, or be it media or other industries like technology. We've got Dubai Media City, Dubai Internet City, the Media City in Abu Dhabi, and many others, which was also successful. Then I think the regime continued to develop. There were various offshore regimes established that has given authorizations to certain offshore companies to acquire real estate rights, which was part of the real estate boom taking place around that time. And then the model continued to develop. So we've later on seen financial free zones, which were more revolutionary in nature because they do have standalone civil and commercial regime to them. So they effectively established new jurisdictions that was more attractive for many financial institutions and international players that are used to financial regulations in key centers around the world. So we've seen DIFC, Dubai International Financial Center, and ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets, both continue to sort of develop and attract investors in the UAE. And then things started to accelerate from that point onwards. We've seen more flexibility in dealing with free zone established companies, allowing them to do certain things that were restricted in the past on the mainland of the UAE. More recently, we have seen dual licensing regimes being introduced again by regulators in different emirates, specifically Dubai and Abu Dhabi, allowing companies to operate from one location with a dual license. And then we've also seen ad hoc exemptions given to key players across different industries, key global players that have been exempted from foreign ownership restrictions. And then, as you said, Mustafa, more recently in 2018, the FDI, the Foreign Direct Investment Law, was issued with its bylaws that followed like 6 months later, which basically opened up investments in 130 plus activities for foreign investors without requiring UAE national participation in the capital of this company. And now we're there. It's the biggest in use. It's a change of the approach to the foreign direct investment concept. I guess we are moving from one where the general rule, which has been in place since the establishment of the federation and the UAE, the rule of 49, 51%, requiring 51% of any company to be held by UAE nationals, that is now gone. We are moving to a concept where the principle is that foreign investors are allowed to own companies without UAE nationals' ownership in them, unless those activities are considered strategic or unless they are restricted by the local licensing authority. So it's quite a change if you look at it. It's quite a journey. It is likely to have an outright positive impact on attracting foreign direct investments into the UAE, and then also normalizing a lot of the existing businesses that have used certain legal structures in the past. And it's a news that actually correspond with the magnitude of the COVID-19 pandemic impact on economies and markets. So it's perfectly timed and is one that came at a time when it was sorely needed.
Hani, do you want to jump in there?
I think it's also very important to note that this new change will also normalize some of the arrangements that some foreign nationals or foreign companies have entered into with the local nationals on a nominee basis. So it's kind of widely known that in a lot of cases, the local shareholder will act as a nominee in that they actually just own the shares but do not participate actively in the business. And this new change will bring an end to this practice and hopefully put everything back into its legal place.
I mean, a lot has changed, since the UAE was formed. In 1971, perhaps in the beginning when foreign investors or foreign companies wanted to set up here, it was mutually beneficial to have an Emirati agent or an Emirati major shareholder. I mean, first of all, they know the country better. They know they have the contacts. And for a foreign company looking to begin here, it probably helps as well for them to put down their roots as a company. And for economic participation for Emiratis when the country was young, it made a lot of sense over time. things have changed considerably on all those fronts. I mean, first of all, the UAE is a known quantity to many foreign investors. They've either been here or worked here or traveled here or know someone who has. But also for Emiratis themselves, they participate across the economy. Public sector, private sector, entrepreneurs, employees, experts, academics. There are a lot of entry points now because of the diversity and the maturity of the economy compared to 20, 30, even 40 years ago, obviously 40 years ago, but even 5 or 10 years ago, if you think about the tech boom. So it feels like, as you said, Omar, perfectly timed, but also, and this leads me to the point that people are already picking up on. We have a well-established ecosystem of onshore and offshore jurisdictions. Now, can you tell me, Hani or Omar, would there still be appetite? Would it still be important to have that ecosystem, or do we only want onshore now?
That's a great question and an absolutely right observation. I mean, this new amendment to the Commercial Companies Law will definitely have some sort of an impact on the appetite of some businesses to choose free zones over onshore. But it's very important to note that free zones do not only offer kind of an unlimited ownership for foreign investors. The majority of the free zones set up in the UAE, whether in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, or across the other Emirates, RAK free zone has been is probably one of the oldest free zones in the region. Across those free zones, there's added value other than the ownership. These have evolved into thriving ecosystems with the relevant infrastructures to those particular businesses. So if you are a logistics company, for example, whether you have an ownership issue or not, you might still want to go to Javza, go to Kizad, go to the Dubai Airport Free Zone, because the infrastructure is much more developed than anywhere else in the region, not only onshore. So those free zones will also maintain some of those benefits. More importantly, the financial free zones, for example, I personally do not see any impact on free zones like the IFC and the ADGM, because the choice of establishing a presence in those free zones is not driven primarily by ownership. It's actually driven by the infrastructure, by the legislations that are there, by the court system that have been established in these free zones, and also by the adoption of different laws that are similar to what you see in the UK or in Hong Kong or in the US. So I don't want to underestimate the impact of this law on free zones, but I don't see that this is a big blow to free zones, especially those who have infrastructures that are suitable for foreign businesses. You can also look at for example, the Dubai Creative Clusters that host the many clusters like the Internet City, the Media City. These have evolved into a great environment for similar business to be set up next to each other's offices and have interaction among themselves. So I think it gives foreign investors more options. The update or the amendment to the Commercial Companies Law gives the foreign investors more option, of course, and they don't have to worry about ownership. They want to benefit from those infrastructures given by the free zones, then they can still go there.
Omar, maybe this is a silly question, but why does being able to own your company 100% matter?
It matters. It matters because you can control the destiny of the business. You can manage it in the way you plan for it. But it also matters because you also take the responsibility and liability for the way you manage the business and for the way you take that business. So it's actually a perfect question to make another point, which I wanted to sort of pick up. I don't think this is only about foreign investors. I think it's also about local investors and local businesses. I mean, in the last 30, 40 years, those businesses have matured, have become way more sophisticated. Many of them have become global and regional, and have become key operators and leaders in many of their industries, not only regionally but also globally. One reason for why that has happened is because they were exposed to the competition that exists in an open market like the UAE. I think with that there is an additional incentive for them to continue to compete, continue to grow, and to continue to go internationally and globally. So that change is also about local investments and local businesses, and this also has to do with the side of the liability in a crisis situation like the pandemic impact and the post-pandemic impact. It was by many of our clients expressed over several occasions that their sort of inactive participation of some of the businesses for the UAE nationals has caused them in crisis situations to be exposed to liabilities that they will not be questioned for otherwise. And it actually brings fairness. If you're not an active controller of a business and that business goes wrong in a crisis situation, why would you be in litigation and find yourself in the court to defend acts and actions of others that you haven't contributed to? So I think one needs to look at this in a holistic way and look at the pros and cons, and that can materialize from a change of that magnitude. On one side, it improves the competition, continues, it enables local business to continue to excel and to grow. And at the same time, it enables investors who have been doing business in this part of the world for the last 20, 30 years to nationalize their investments and to make this their permanent domicile and to grow them even bigger and to take them to a different level. So if there was a hesitation at the foreign investors' end, I think that change of the law and the approach to treating foreign direct investments will address those concerns.
And I wonder as well, in the event that a company that has been running, let's say, as long as the UAE has, close to 50 years, changing of generations, you look at succession planning, the ability to more easily exit. Should a foreign investor want to buy your business, they can own it 100% in almost all sectors now. That's also going to be something that perhaps is going to grow in importance over the years.
100%. We do issue a what we call a mergers and acquisitions index every 6 months, and it's an index that tracks basically and a report that tracks merger and acquisition activities in the UAE and in the region. We were talking about that report yesterday internally here in the firm, and one comment I made was I'm really keen to see the impact of that change in a year time on that index and that report, because when we help clients, whether selling their businesses or acquiring businesses in the UAE, foreign ownership restrictions is usually a top due diligence point. In many cases, we have seen transactions abort because of foreign ownership restrictions, or because certain international investors are not comfortable with the structures that are in place and with the lack of sort of control over the business they want to acquire. So that's definitely one area to watch out for and see a positive impact on as a result of that amendment to the law.
Just to complete Omar's idea, I think everybody needs to understand that this is a license to own more than 49%. It's not an obligation, right? It just opens the market and opens the options for shareholders to design the ownership of their company the way they really want, right? According to the actual input and added value that each shareholder brings to the table. I don't see that all the foreign companies are going to jump immediately to 100% and basically continue work without the need for a local ownership. As you said before, the local ownership adds a lot of value to any company operating in the UAE. There's a knowledge of the market, there's a knowledge of the institutions, of the government, of how things operate. So I see that as an opportunity to rebalance and give a real picture of the actual partnership between the shareholders. I was on a call with a client earlier today who simply want to go up from 49% to 51% there. So basically they're flipping it because the local owner adds a lot of value to the business. He's a real decision maker. He has representative on the board of directors. It's simply because the way that the joint venture was structured at the time of inception, the foreign national invested 51% versus 49. But because of local ownership restrictions, they had to flip it. It's a slight amendment or shifting of the needle to basically describe or give a real picture, as I said, for the partnership.
So maybe we can sort of wrap this up by talking about what we don't know. So we've just been talking about what we do know. Many of the amendments for the law will be effective from next month. A lot of that has to do with the way companies are structured or governed. But with the top line moves, for example, the fully foreign ownership aspects of it will be effective 6 months from when the changes are published in the official gazette. But companies will have a year from the effective date to comply. But because of what I mentioned earlier about, for example, what each emirate will do in their own decision making, and also this committee that's being set up to look at strategic sectors, and also the cabinet's involvement, perhaps, Omar and Hani, it's going to take a bit of time for us to fully understand what the landscape's going to look like.
Yes, Mustafa, I think that is that's a fair suggestion. I think these are the headline changes to the law. There will be details, and I think the point about the 6 months that you've mentioned about the key change, which relates to the ownership restrictions liberalization, is basically designed to allow a committee to be formed, and that committee to study the activities of strategic impact that will continue to have some restrictions to them, and make recommendations to the cabinet that will then adopt that list and issue it. It will also offer some time for the local licensing authorities, the Department of Economic Development in many of the Emirates, to consider the level of requirements or participation, whether to the ownership of businesses or companies, or to the board membership of companies in that local emirates, in those activities or sectors that they intend or think it is appropriate to introduce such requirements for. So there's a bit of work to be done in that sense, and I think the conventional wisdom is for companies and foreign investors and even existing businesses, while continue to be excited about the change and the prospects it will bring to the business, to be a little patient and wait for the rest of the details to be out and disclosed, so that any business decisions are built on enough information and enough familiarity with the new legal landscape. The point about compliance is something that has already obviously been reported and is common when you introduce major changes to the law. But I tend to think that because you are releasing restrictions here, compliance is likely to be relatively more straightforward for many of the companies, obviously with some caveats as to how to manage a relationship the companies have with their local partners. Time will provide us with the rest of the information we're all looking for, but I think patience here can be a virtue, and hopefully it won't be long before the details are announced and are out to the public.
Yeah, no, I agree with Omar's observations. I think it's people and companies need to take time to prepare, obviously. They need to also look at what they have done in the last few years in light of the foreign direct investment law, for example, which a lot of companies have benefited from or are in the process of benefiting from, to see how those applications or approvals will interact with the new amendments of the Commercial Companies Law. Again, we're all very, very excited about this change. I think it will put the UAE at an even more competitive level. But the advice for companies is to be patient, be methodic, and not jump to conclusions immediately until the scene is very clear.
Hani Naja and Omar Momany from Baker McKenzie, Habib Al Mulla, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you very much, Mustafa.
Before you go, here are some of the other stories at thenationalnews.com. Oil prices extended their rally to touch 8-month highs on the back of optimistic vaccine trials, an orderly transition in the White House, and the possibility of OPEC Plus extending its current level of output curbs. The Supreme Petroleum Council approved Abu Dhabi National Oil Company's plans to spend 448 billion dirhams over the next 5 years, of which 160 billion will be directed towards the local economy. And Amazon has increased its storage capacity by over 45% in the UAE, creating more than 2,000 new permanent and seasonal jobs. That's it for today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe or leave a review. All that remains to thank our production team, Arthur Edison and Aisha Khan, and you all for listening. Please join us again next time.